that there's been a bit of a move out of speculative stocks, like biotech stocks, psychedelic stocks, because of the continuing economic uncertainty, interest rates, inflation, COVID, and the geopolitical uncertainty that we're seeing in Russia, Ukraine. So these have all affected those more speculative stocks. But I think as we go through the year and we see things start to stabilize a bit in the general markets, and we start to see psychedelic companies like Cybin execute, then I think that interest will certainly come back.
Doug Drysdale is back. He's the CEO of Cybin Inc. Trades on NEO under the symbol CYBN, in the United States under the symbol CYBN. Doug, welcome back.
Hey, James, good to see you again. Thanks for having me.
You bet. It's a pleasure as usual. Doug, lots of news lately. What's the latest with Cybin?
Yes, lots of news recently. Three main things, I would say. The first is that for our depression program, CYB3, we had a very successful meeting with the UK regulatory authorities, the MHRA, which is the equivalent to the FDA. Very positive and productive meeting, a meeting of minds, if you like. That's good preparation for our upcoming depression study later this year. It's really strong validation for our preclinical program that we've been doing and our upcoming depression studies. So good news there. Second piece of news is that for our anxiety program, CYB4, we were just granted a patent from the US Patent Office. This is a composition of matter patent for our molecule. It's a deuterated version of DMT, or dimethyltryptamine. And it's an important molecule because DMT typically is very aggressive, very sharp plasma spike that can be quite challenging for patients. And our CYB4 molecule is designed to be smoother and less aggressive and more pleasant. So that patent goes out to 2041, so protects the investments that we're making in development there. So that's obviously good news and supporting that program. And then lastly, just yesterday, the Chopra Foundation, Dr. Deepak Chopra, announced a partnership with Cybin. That group has been working for decades to improve awareness and education around mental health disorders. And we still have quite a lot of stigma and misinformation around mental health and psychedelics. Just the other day, we were speaking to a scientist that supports regulators, and their first reaction to psychedelics was that these molecules are addictive and cause suicidality. Both of those things are false, by the way, but concerning that you have people in those positions that still are misinformed. And so we clearly have a lot of work to do to improve education awareness around this research. So great to be partnering with the Chopra Foundation on helping us with some of that.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Well, great. Where do these trials take place? Like, where are the subjects coming from?
Yeah, so our first study in depression, which will kick off around mid-year this year, will be in the US. We plan an IND filing with the FDA next quarter. So that'll be in a center on the East Coast. So far, from our initial study at the University of Washington, we're seeing a huge amount of demand. So that's a study that kicked off in December of last year, and we were just looking to recruit 30 patients, and we've already got a waiting list of about 1,000 patients. So it just shows you just the extent of demand and the extent of the issue that we're trying to deal with. So
then, around the world, is it your sense that the psychedelic sort of penetration of mental health is proceeding as well as it possibly could? Or is it more so that the amount of competition is causing some dilution to the entire value proposition?
No, I think it's progressing well. Yes, there are lots of companies working in the space, but I think that's somewhat to be expected in an early situation like this. And to some extent, having multiple companies working in the space helps fuel innovation. So we'll see some consolidation for sure, but I think it's a good thing for now. And these multiple companies are sponsoring studies at centers all around the world, in the Netherlands, in the UK, in the US, in Australia. And that's helping to educate regulators and policymakers in all of those jurisdictions. So I think it's a good thing for now.
Your subsidiary, Adelia, what's the latest there?
Yeah, so we acquired Adelia Therapeutics back in December of 2020. That team has been phenomenal. They really are the core of our R&D efforts. They're fully integrated into the Cybin team. And all of the work that they've been doing, all of the milestones that they've been hitting have been to complete the preclinical work we need to put a package together in front of the regulators, and that package will support us moving into human studies later this year. So I would see Adelia really as Cybin is fully integrated, and of course that transaction has proved to be a very fruitful one.
Doug, as we look out across the entire universe of publicly traded psychedelics researchers and companies, the sector is essentially been characterized by a lot of a sell-off. And so stock prices are down and volumes are starting to, thin out a bit. What is it about the psychedelic sector that is causing this general malaise?
Yeah, the sector is down. That's for sure. Since November, some of the psych ETFs are down 40% or so. In the same time frame, the biotech index, the XBI, is down 30% or so. So, while the S&P is down maybe 3 or 4%, something like that, we had a bit of a bounce back in the S&P. So I'd say that there's been a bit of a move out of speculative stocks, like biotech stocks, psychedelic stocks, because of the continuing economic uncertainty, interest rates, inflation, COVID, and the geopolitical uncertainty that we're seeing in Russia, Ukraine. So these have all affected those more speculative stocks. But I think as we go through the year and we see things start to stabilize a bit in the general markets, and we start to see psychedelic companies like Cybin execute, then I think that interest will certainly come back.
So there's nothing in the psychedelic sector that is causing investors to lose faith. It's more just a general sort of anticipation of the reduction in stimulus and the increase in interest rates that is causing markets to deflate generally.
I think that's true. I do think there was some potential overreaction to some of the Comp 360 data that came out in the early November. That was really driven by, I think, inflated expectations that these molecules would be panaceas, which of course that's unrealistic to expect that any treatment would work miraculously for every person. So a bit of reaction there, but I think the larger reaction in the sector is really economically driven.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so then in 2022, what are sort of the biggest achievements you expect to accomplish?
Some really big catalysts coming up. So this next quarter, we'll complete all of our preclinical studies for CYB3. We'll file an IND with the FDA. That'll be our first molecule-based IND, so a big milestone for us. And that means that we should be able to start a study in depression in human patients right around mid-year for that molecule, with maybe some data by the end of the year, which would be exciting to get the first readout on PK and safety. And then for our anxiety program, CYB4, we also plan to run a study. This will likely be in Europe, with kicking off around the third quarter, a pilot study in anxiety disorders.
Sure. I'm curious about the your modified DMT treatment in terms of what is the psychochemical mechanism that you employ that diminishes the unpredictability and the sort of extreme visuals in DMT experience that cause some people to view the entire experience as unpleasant?
Yeah, well, a lot of the unpleasantness comes from the aggressive plasma curve. So literally DMP goes up to a very high spike and back down again in 10 minutes, which is pretty aggressive. So what we're able to do through our chemistry, and we're using a process called deuteration, which is substituting hydrogen atoms on the DMT molecule with deuterium, which is heavy hydrogen. That slows the whole breakdown process down. So that means that our DMT version gets into the bloodstream quickly. The peak isn't as high, we're slowing the breakdown, so it's not coming down so rapidly. So overall, the curve is extended and smoother, and we're hoping to create a more pleasant and more pleasurable experience for the patient, rather than this aggressive spike that you see with classical DMT.
Sure. So among the psychedelic compounds, do you see any sort of having broader application or a much more rapid penetration of the market over the others? For example, does psilocybin have more of a broader audience potentially than DMT, or are they all kind of like still too early to say?
I think it's a little bit too early to say, and I think that all these conditions manifest themselves in different ways in different patients. So not every depressed patient is the same, certainly not homogeneous. And also there's a lot of comorbidities between these conditions. So patients that have anxiety disorders may go on to develop depression. Patients that are depressed may turn to substances for support and become addicted. So our goal is to develop a portfolio of products based upon psilocybin and DMT, these analogs and derivatives. We're also looking at analogs and derivatives of MDMA. And our goal is to be able to give physicians a choice, so they can look at the different profiles of these molecules and match them to the appropriate patient and condition.
Great to hear that things are going well, Doug. We'll have you back again soon. Thanks for your time today.
Thanks, James. Thanks for having me. Take care.
You bet. Bye for now.